Welcome to those of you who are new faces. I'm Deborah Rundlett, and this is the Pivot Projects. We're really glad you're here. I want to give you a piece of background that was actually written by Colin Harrison, who is one of the three leads, along with Peter Head. And I just love what he's written. In early March 2020, three British engineers had the thought that the disruption caused by COVID-19 provided an opportunity to reorient the world toward the UN goals of sustainability, resilience, and equality. So, drawing on their networks, they gathered and built a team of 150 professionals and academics, and that number is growing across 30 countries to develop AI-based techniques for this goal. By harnessing the vast experience of these different global participants who come both from engineering backgrounds and also from really every discipline you can imagine, along with the wisdom of indigenous cultures, a unique database, and in Colin's words, the sheer computational power of artificial intelligence linked to systems modeling. Other people of the Pivot Projects are providing suggestions for what it means to pivot, as well as local tools and training for individuals, local communities, and policymakers across the globe for their best regenerative, resilient pivot paths. Stories, experiences, faith, data, hypotheses that no human could think of is guiding us all to take small and big steps toward a much brighter future. And so today we have the gift of a conversation with Peter. I'm going to ask that we keep ourselves muted except when we have a question or are going to be engaged in a piece of conversation. Peter has about an 8-minute introduction for us, in addition to the one that I put into the chat box. And I'm going to start recording in a moment, so I hope that that is all right with all of you, so that we'll be able to share with those who were not able to be here today. We'll have, some introduction from Peter, conversation, and then Kevin has a piece that he will be sharing, followed by some closing words from Peter. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you go to the website. There's a way to sign on to the website. I will be putting that into the chat so that we can keep you updated with everything that's going on. And with that, I'm going to start the recording and I'm going to pass the baton to Peter. And I'm going to also put him for this segment into the spotlight.
Right, hello everybody. I'm going to take you back to 2008 when I was working for Arup and spending a lot of time in China. It was the year of the Beijing Olympics, the terrible Sichuan earthquake and the global crash. You'll remember that. In the middle of that, I was invited to give the global Brunel lecture tour by the Institution of Civil Engineers, which is the professional body for accreditation of civil engineers in the UK. I chose to research and then present how the world could move quickly away from the industrial development model pioneered by Brunel in Britain towards the ecological civilization that was then being pursued by China and now written into their constitution. In this transformative change, I explained how we could tackle climate change and ecological destruction and how we could lift people out of poverty, aiming for a happier life in harmony with nature. I concluded that to enable 9 billion people to live in a sustainable, resilient life in 2050, we needed an urgent factor for change. I identified the roles engineers, designers, planners, financiers could play and what changes in regulations and economic policy would be needed to bring about a combination of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, an 80% reduction in pollution and waste, and a factor 4 reduction in ecological footprint. I presented this in 26 countries and 38 cities, and as you can imagine, I learned quite a lot. I showed that such an approach was feasible and attractive in each country, and a key element in delivering it would be our ability to turn the tsunami of data we're getting into wisdom. But people were shocked and skeptical, even when I pointed out that for China to continue on a 7 to 10% GDP growth trajectory, the government would need to find tracts of land outside China for resource exploitation that was twice the size of France every year. I explained it wasn't feasible for them or for Indonesia, India, Brazil, Nigeria, and other African countries to follow the same GDP growth model without destroying the rest of our ecosystems. They listened, but then settled back into business as usual approach and with a few small tweaks of incremental change. It brought me into conflict with a lot of colleagues in competitive consulting practices who said they had to deliver what clients asked for and they couldn't pursue this radical direction. The institution of civil engineers carried on with business as usual. Built environment clients generally had a short-term perspective anyway, and oil dependency was built into everything. I left Arup in 2011, realizing that private companies wouldn't lead the change. And so I set up a UK charity, the Ecological Sequestration Trust, now Resilience Brokers, to bring together some brilliant people and create some new tools to try to help the world work collaboratively along the journey and also help to explain the threats and needs rather better. In 2013, I helped to create and write Sustainable Development Goal 11 for cities. And in 2014, I was one of the authors of the Planetary Health Commission report that set out how our natural systems were being undermined for our health and well-being. This raised even more serious concerns about the risks that we were taking, including the likelihood of future pandemics, which of course we're now experiencing. In 2016, we created Roadmap 2030, a practical step-by-step guide for a collaborative approach to financing and implementing the global goals in city regions for the Habitat 3 meeting in Quito to enable the new urban agenda to be delivered. Looking back since 2008, ecology in 20% of the world's land has been compromised, and climate change is accelerating with a 16% increase in greenhouse gas emissions and an 80% reduction, compared with the 80% reduction track that I talked about. Ecological footprint has increased by 25%, not reduced. Forests are being pulled down and burning, of course. And as we said in our Planetary Health Commission report, pandemics will soon become more frequent and serious as a result. So the challenges that we're facing are so much greater now, and we're getting close to a catastrophic edge. The 2020 UN Global Assessment Report that's just been released says that 1 million of the nearly 9 million estimated plant and animal species could be pushed over the brink by habitat destruction, pollution, overexploitation, and increasingly by climate change. This in turn will completely undermine our future resilience. We're at a tipping point. We're at a moment in time now where we have a very narrow window of opportunity to change the world for the better. We and our fellow professionals all over the world are responsible for making this awful thing happen. It's not someone else's fault, it's our fault. But there is some good news for us. It is a systems problem, and with collaboration among different disciplines at a global scale, we could help the world to pivot with system solutions to start regeneration. We currently choose to put railways directly through ancient forests in the UK, when forests could be avoided by going through farmland which has degraded soils. We create the infrastructure to mine coal in ancient forests in India, even when we know that solar energy and hydrogen can remove the need for more coal. We design and build buildings that need gas heating and large energy consumption, but we know how to do otherwise. We specify steel for our projects without asking for it to come from recycled material, so that raw material and coal are not used, but we keep specifying the other thing. We ignore the warnings from indigenous communities and religious leaders and generally don't support a just and fair transition in the communities involved in our projects. Our disruptive relationship with nature is putting us at ever greater risks from pandemics and disease. As you've already heard, in March this year, we could see that COVID-19 would change everything about the way we live. And so we brought together 150 experts and young people from all over the world to explore how it might be possible to pivot quickly towards this ecological civilization using the likely stimulus recovery funding that we expected to follow. We call ourselves pivot projects. So we're training one of the world's most powerful artificial intelligence machines, Spark Beyond, to understand systems interconnections between human and ecological activities at all scales. And we aim to help everyone, including communities, to create and select scenarios of change, turning this tsunami of data into local wisdom. We're being told by people all over the world in pivot projects that they don't want to go back. They want clean air, they want walking and cycling, they want more work from home, more green space, reliable access to water and sanitation, and resilient local food supplies. They want regenerative land and ocean farming. Most of all, they want their world to run on renewables, not fossil fuels, and the much lower solar and wind energy costs, of course, now make that possible. So we're talking now about a regenerative economic model in which job creation and improved health, rooted in ecological and soil health, become a priority rather than GDP growth. GDP growth is not success. Because running costs and risks are lower, investment in all this makes sense, and there is enough private capital to do it. And of course, we have very low interest rates at the moment. A group of engineers and architects was recently convened by the UK branch of the International Association of Bridge and Structural Engineers, which is my sort of route in my career, to discuss the crisis. And we all agreed over 2 days of conversation online that enough is enough. We need radical change and transformation globally. We need to work with all the different disciplines. We need to upskill our professions. We need to change teaching and learning. We need to create powerful knowledge sharing and feedback loops supported by artificial intelligence. We need to focus on long-term value through the exclusive use of project lifetime performance specifications for all our work, which meet these transformational needs. And we need large-scale demonstrations of change, of course, to show that it's possible. We will all need to have the ethics and courage to completely turn our back on the catastrophic trajectory. And 30,000 young people have signed the Ecological Awakening Pledge in France to not work anymore for polluting companies. So it is happening. The Architect Declares initiative at RIBA in the UK, with 442 signatories, have now committed to faster radical change. And the LETI, London Energy Transformation Initiative, has 1,000 professionals, mostly young people, working hard voluntarily to put the UK on a zero carbon pathway. But we feel now that we need to do this globally and support each other on the journey, not all try and do it separately. So we think we need to create a voice for collaborative transformational change, and we need to build the capability, knowledge and value propositions like performance specifications to enable it all to be implemented. So we have an idea to work with you to create the Built Environment Pivot Institute as a global membership organization to do all of that in each of your countries, supported by a global knowledge sharing and capacity building engine. We hope to create many more pivot clients and then connect you as pivot professionals to them so that we can all learn together and make the pivot accelerate globally and of course to enable people to have jobs in the process. We would welcome now your reaction and thoughts on all of that, and of course any interest in participating in the journey together if you're not already involved in pivot projects for this radical change agenda. I know what I've said is radical, but a lot of us feel that now is the moment when we have to take really radical action and commit ourselves to it. So thank you all very much. I'll hand back to Deborah.
Thank you so much, Peter. So we're interested in your thoughts. We're also interested in ways that we might better collaborate together. And what I would invite you to do is just simply enter into the conversation. And of course, Peter is more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. And we have asked Kevin in a bit to share some more information.
I have a question, Peter, if you could help with that. One of the areas that I find that has created a challenge is this process is also disruptive to the existing financial systems. How do you see pivot projects addressing the need for funding for projects, as well as the creation of potentially new value exchange systems?
Yeah, no, thanks, Paul. Pivot Projects is hooked up with the financial world, and we have a sort of interim finance report, and it's an area that in Resilience Brokers we've been studying for quite a long time, and I've had a lot of meetings with both the finance and insurance world, and basically there's a lot of money in the black world circulating. Circulating in awful stuff, because that's where people can make money. So a lot of financial flows that go through Switzerland are attracted into the black awful world. But a lot of people who are directing that money say we'd much rather it go into a world that does good and still achieves a sensible return. So the pivot has to achieve a return on investment for the private sector. This isn't going to be done as an ethical investment. It's going to be done as a return on capital, but with very low interest rates and opportunities to invest in dramatically reducing risk, which is actually one of the big opportunities here, because lots and lots of businesses and capital owners are facing massive risks in every direction at the moment. Here we can create opportunities where operating costs of infrastructure and buildings are much, much lower. They're much more attractive to live in. The environment in which people can live is much more attractive. So it will tend to draw capital in because of the demand for the exciting opportunities that are created. So a lot of people in the finance community believe if the projects come through, there's no problem at all in finding the money. But the problem in the past has been that people are not creating the projects. They're not creating the scale and the projects that really enable this to happen. So everywhere I go, sustainable finance meetings in Switzerland and other places, and talking to pension funds and other people, they want lower risks and they want projects that actually deliver a good return on capital, but also have longer term prospects of continued revenue and greater security from the lower risks. So I'm pretty optimistic, actually. Everywhere I go, people say that actually the money is not the problem. The problem is the inability to bring forward the projects at scale.
I have a question, Peter. Nice to see you.
Yes, lovely to see you too.
We know from the elders circle, Peter and I, so he knows my interest is in the faith community and the moral and ethical dimension of this problem. What I'm asking, talking about finance, the Catholic Church, Church of England, there's a lot of funds held by spiritual institutions, and I'm wondering whether the Pivot Project will negotiate, maybe, for instance, you might want to show carbon soak-up of tree growth or something like that, that they have vast areas of land, some of the institutions, and they have capital. So I wonder whether there was anybody in the team who have a relationship with that sort of resource, because we have to remember 80% of the population of this planet have some sort of a religious background, and that's particularly true, although we're pretty cynical in the West, in the southern developing countries. I wonder whether you could enlighten us on that idea.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Great question. Very important point. So, gosh, must have been about 4 years ago now. A guy called Martin Palmer, who was involved and asked by the UN to bring the faiths into line with delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. We actually started talking to each other, and we brought the commitment of the faiths into our roadmap 2030. So you'll find the commitments that they pledged in 2015 with Martin's support. All the faith leaders came together and said what they wanted to do to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. That's actually embodied into roadmap 2030. And then they went on to say, well, actually, just exactly what you said is that we've got a huge number of assets and capital that we would like to deploy into supporting this. So Martin brought them together, and we actually supported him bringing them together to a meeting in Zug in Switzerland to actually come together and agree together, all of the world's faith leaders who are involved in the finance world. They came together and they wrote a commitment to actually bring their capital into sustainable development outcomes and tackling climate change. And I was there actually when they all lit a candle together in the medieval church in Zug in Switzerland to read out the scriptures from each of their Qurans and Bibles and other documents, which actually commit their faiths to protecting the sacred planet. And it was a very moving occasion. So they've now created something called Faith Invest, which is an organization committed to draw faith consistent investment through into projects. And that organization has been set up, and we are set up to work with them so that we can actually mobilize that capital as we move forward. So actually we're in quite a good position, really.
Peter, can I add to that? So up until the end of August, Chris, I co-facilitated the Faiths team. I'm a Presbyterian pastor from the US, and we see this moving on two levels. One is on a very high level, denominational level. So there are groups such as the Presbyterian Foundation, and you will find them across every major denomination, tribe, and movement, who have been very ethically and morally involved in the ways in which money has been invested and deployed. And we are coming closer to a point where we can bring those individuals into a very productive conversation. The other piece, though, is we see a movement, if you will, on the ground, in the deployment into our communities. And I can give you a very quick story about John Fullerton, who is a Presbyterian, and as an elder at Rye Presbyterian Church, when he was still at J.P. Morgan, became very convicted about the need for regenerative economics. And that led him actually to leave his position at J.P. Morgan and to enter into the work that he's been doing. So there's an extensive social network of lay leaders across the globe who are deeply committed. And a piece of that is actually coming through with our economics team, of which Damian Costello is lead. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Damian, in terms of some of the conversations that you're having.
Well, the whole, we're looking at economics from a sort of a macroeconomic perspective, and we're seeing a massive change, a very significant pivot in the middle of all of this. How exactly it pans out, we're still in discovery. The more time we spend on it, the more challenging the question becomes. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure, Deborah, where to take this particular conversation.
I have a simple suggestion. I really like the idea of capital being better invested, and 80% of the capital assets are priced as real estate. So I really like the repricing of real estate for regenerative agriculture. And I also really like the redevelopment of the post-COVID empty offices and empty malls and empty single-use zones into more mixed-use, better balanced lifestyle choices. So I really like that built environment thing, but in the context of religion, since we are repricing based on a new value system, there's a need for trust. And, you know, the people that priced the value originally are not trusted to do it again. The banks that funded the offices aren't necessarily credible at investing, as you said, wisely in renewable infrastructure investments. And I think even the people who claim to do no harm, like Google, have misled people in the redevelopment to where they're not trusted to use their models, their marketing, advertising driven models in an unbiased way to price out new developments in Toronto. And so I'm really interested, Peter, in, I think having the faith-based pricing is really valuable, but I think it will take some sort of transparency or some sort of policy position to enable people to trust the capital, you know, the public-private partnership. In particular, I think there's some expectation around open policies, that there's a need for a public-private partnership kind of a model between the common goods models and the private for money models that's transparent. Could you comment on that? Does that?
No, I very much agree with that. And I think one of the keys to this is going to be to mobilize more of the local money into local benefit, because then I think trust is easier to develop. If the money's generated in you know, somewhere else in the world and coming to your local place, you're not going to trust it as much as if it was generated by the savings of your own population, which is not a new idea, because that's how we started, of course. That's what banks were for. It's what building societies were for. But of course, they've become overtaken by, you know, by these global monoliths who have forgotten what they're for. So I think the decentralized approach of deploying money, and if necessary, using the new tools to do that in a trustworthy way, because I think blockchain has the capability to do that, because it's much more transparent in a transaction sense. So I think the local recycling of savings and money is much more likely to work in that sense. But we've still got to get away from allowing the market to inflate land price. That I think is still one of the big catastrophic problems that gives rise to conflict, to corruption, and everything else. We've got to find a way of getting rid of that somehow, either through you know, really severe taxation or something. But I think if we can get rid of that and use local money, then I think it's much more likely to work.
Certainly in the context of disaster resilience, where I do a good deal of work, and Peter, I know you've been involved as well, the problem oftentimes is one of a sheer lack of understanding. It's a lack of understanding on two levels. The first is people don't fully understand the benefits of investing in resilience, and therefore they don't include those in ROI type calculations. And secondly, they don't have a full understanding of exactly where money might come from. When I'm working with cities, one of the questions I'll often ask them is, do you have a financial atlas, is the term I use, of where potential money could come from, whether it's government funds, foundations, NGOs, private companies, et cetera, keeping in mind that funds that might be usable for resilience may not have resilience in the title. So in the US, HUD or EPA or something like that. And almost never do they have that. And one of the things that they go, one of the usual takeaways from when I've been working with them is they go away and start trying to do that. So maybe there's a job of work to be done by the Pivot Project for kind of creating a financial atlas for improving the world. Just the atlas obviously is a metaphor, but just a readout of some of the ways that financing is available today to do this project. Picking up on your comment earlier, where the financiers say, actually, the issue is not the lack of money, it's the lack of projects. Equally, projects are not coming forward because people don't know how to address the financial system. If we can set ourselves a job of bridging that gulf, we might cause, you could even say it's another point of leverage. We might cause more good things to happen.
Yeah, that's partly why the performance specifications are so important.
Right.
Because if you lock the performance specifications into the life cycle of buildings, then actually the value proposition is a lot clearer and the risks are a lot lower, and therefore you're connected more directly into the financing. So
that's why real estate's so important. That real estate is the surrogate price for infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so all of the smart city infrastructure projects show up as value in real estate.
Yeah.
When 80% of the wealth in the world is real estate, you know where the money is for each city.
Yeah.
And you just need to, so if you're funding transportation is the biggest infrastructure cost, the payout for transportation is real estate value.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real chance to restructure the real estate value based on the new activities that are happening post-COVID.
Yeah. One of the things that people on the call will probably know, but if you're following the whole sustainable infrastructure systems approach, including nature-based solutions, which is part of this pivot, then actually the opportunity is very profound, because with decentralized systems and nature-based solutions, you can actually reduce the cost of total infrastructure in the built environment by as much as 40%, which typically is around 2 or 3% GDP a year in terms of what we need to invest to create this better world. So actually there's a very, very big opportunity in taking forward an integrated systems approach that we're advocating, in the sense of just reducing the cost of everything, and of course increasing the value as well. So if you can decrease the cost and increase the value, it becomes a very exciting proposition of the sort that people haven't seen before, really.
But if we can only help two sides understand how to work with each other to achieve that, Peter, that would be a valuable job of work right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have two questions. One is coming from Chris Rogers, who's going to speak first, and then Mike Cook.
Yes, Peter, thank you for that. Obviously, you're aware that I agree with everything you're saying. You've put your finger on a really important point, of course, in terms of how one puts forward proposals that not only deliver on the financial case, but deliver on all of the other benefits that one might derive from a systemic approach to creating value and understanding that value. And we've heard this idea of de-risking, and we've heard of the ideas of transparency and so on. The way I would argue this, and I think the Pivot Project has a unique opportunity to do this because of the breadth of its reach, is to create what I would call a suite of business models. Now, as soon as I say business models, some of you think dollars, some of you think pound notes or yen or whatever. I'm not talking about that. In fact, what I'm talking about is understanding what all the positive consequences of a suite of inventions might deliver, set against all the negative consequences of the suite of inventions. And Peter Williams will know this because I keep banging on about it. But I mean, if we then start to put, well, what price is resilience and what price sustainability? But in fact, if we were able to articulate fully how these radical changes might play out in all of the different spheres, and effectively create a suite of business models targeted at different actors, different funders, if you wish, looking at where the benefits lie. And of course, the benefits are multiple and they lie in different places. then we have an opportunity to engage with the funders, because we would say you're putting in something in the way of a contribution, which is almost likely to be cash in many cases. And what you're delivering is a suite of benefits that will deliver on your own agendas. But then, of course, there are multiple agendas being done. And so, and it becomes horribly complex, of course, or at least complicated, maybe not necessarily complex. But if one can then get to that point of saying, this change will deliver this suite of benefits to these different places, and then it becomes blindingly obvious. And if we can get around all the forms of governance that might get in the way of the benefits of delivery, and we have to make sure we align with the forms of governance, then we've got an opportunity to move forward. So I would argue that the evidence base is largely created. I would argue that the case for change, which Peter has very eloquently stated, is sort of blindingly obvious to everybody, maybe except certain people in White Houses or whatever. But I think generally the case for change is something that at least we would accept. But it's those last two bits. It's the transparent business models and the forms of governance aligned with them that would unpick this. So, and like Peter, I'm the eternal optimist. I think if we get to where we need to go with this particular pivot project, we should be able to do that last bit of making the case change and making that change happen.
Yeah, and of course I totally agree with that. But I think one of the critical things about it is that the value proposition has to be for the community. It's the community that this is for. It's not for investors and others. I mean, they can get some money along the way, but the value proposition is with the local people. And if the local people have an interest in the project, both in terms of its value, but also in terms of its financing, with their pensions and their savings and other things, then of course it all starts to work, because actually they then have a say in where the money comes from and how it's used as well. So I think, that model, I mean, we've seen it working in small communities with the renewable energy projects, but why doesn't it work in other communities at a city scale? I can't see any reason why we can't make it work, really.
No, but and you're exactly right, because what you're saying is, but you need to create that business, that investment proposition, value proposition, business case, whatever you like to call it, for the community, for individuals, for the private organizations, for the public and if you have all of those business cases, and it's different lenses looking at the same thing, your radical change, if looked at appropriately, would deliver a suite of, I call it a suite of business models, and they're all transparent. They're not hiding anything. Then we've got a chance of making it work.
Totally agree. So it's performance specifications and business models.
It can happen at the neighbourhood level as well, though, Peter, as well. If you look at, for example, how microgrids are beginning to be implemented in a number of cities, that might be worth a case study right there in terms of how they tend to get financed.
Yeah.
I'd like to just pick up briefly on what Chris said there. I completely agree with your comments, Chris. The work stream that I head is economics, law, and politics, and we're sort of looking at the establishment and the resistance the establishment is going to put on slowing the pivot, so that we can run interference and lubricate the process and hit some of these objections off, kill them in their tracks. And I think we have identified that corporations are a key player in this. There is another financial work stream. So the financing is not in the economics work stream. So to be clear about that in terms of where I'm coming from. But we do need to close the loop on the business models. And why would corporations invest in these things? Because what we're talking about here is system of systems benefits. We're talking about holistic benefits. And these corporations tend to be still thinking short term, but they tend to operate in one domain, and they don't particularly care about the benefits, the holistic knock-on benefits. And the way of closing the loop there, I think, has to do with, you talk about the communities and the general public, but also from a corporate perspective, those are the consumers. And a more informed consumption and consumers that, given a choice, between a corporation that is paying lip service to the type of investment we're talking about here, and those that are making a genuine difference. And possibly on top of the business models, maybe we also need to be looking at some form of league table to inform people of which of the corporations really are trying to move the needle, and which of them are just greenwashing their from a PR perspective.
Yeah,
but I think there are.
If I can just respond to that, I of course agree with that, and one of the things that is the problem is that a lot of people invest in the built environment so they can get a short-term profit from the increasing land value, and then they sell it on to others who take a longer-term interest, and that's the thing we've got to get to grips with. We've got to sort of cut that approach out through some means or another, because most investments in the built environment get sold on very quickly, which is why people don't have a long-term interest and will always do the wrong thing.
So I like the portfolio of business models, but I think, Peter, you're right. There are some business models that are kind of the de facto places to innovate. So on the one hand, if you're reducing risk, there's a business model of providing insurance. And regenerative farming can provide insurance to the farmers, and resilient microgrids can provide insurance to the regulated, utilities. But the 80% of it is the real estate value being shared more equitably. And so on the value side, there needs to be some sort of ownership model has some stock options that can be vested in social capital, natural capital improvements. And so I think the portfolio is a good idea, and I think there's a balancing of a portfolio of a commons that's sort of like insurance policies that get the benefit out of prevention, like public health or reduction of risk. And there's the other side of the portfolio that's going on what people value as a distinctive community. And we know how that value works. It's a branding of a developer, but the ownership of what's developed isn't equitable. So it needs to be some sort of better stock ownership, vesting.
I noticed, Deborah, that Aneta had a comment.
Yes, and then Mike Cook has been trying to.
All right. Okay.
Actually, you just answered this. I agree, because what I can see, even from my perspective, being a developer and working with other developers, there is usually an exit strategy pretty quickly. So there needs to be some sort of determinant for the investor to have a selection process where this resilience and thinking about not 5-year lifespan of a project, but third generation, that is part of the valuation of the investment. And I think that there has been a change from the occupier side requiring more, and then they were pushing on developers to deliver better and healthier, more well-being, more sustainability. Then we got, on the other hand, government pushing on this, but there also should be that investment element or need from the investors to have that long-term view. And I think, banks are now restructuring that they have to have green finance, but maybe there should be more in terms of the length of the projects and the investment lifespan as well.
Thanks. Mike?
If I could, and I'm picking up really on what Aneta said, and nobody's yet mentioned in the investment world the climate-related financial disclosure requirement that seems to be coming in, and this seems to have been coming in for a number of years. I'm sure people are aware of it, but it does seem that there's an increasing expectation for investors to be sound investors, thinking about future scenarios and planning for climate change, and that becoming more and more essential. So if that was just one thing I just wanted to put on the table. But I think if you look at every single sphere that matters, and you've touched on all of them, I think, Peter, at one moment or another, the business models that we work with, the financial and investment models that we work with, government models, practice, construction, they all need to shift, as we know, and they all need to, but they need to shift together. It's too brave to try to make a big shift in one sphere without confidence generated by knowing that everything else will shift at the same time, that government will move to support you, that your designers, your builders and so on, that community can step forward with the necessary skills to actually achieve what you're aiming to, that the business models don't fall over because, you know, capitalism is saying, you know, my vision is to make loads of money, so that's going to kill it. So it's getting everything to move at once, which is where your pivot model is clearly very strong, because I think it's saying that in the end we need to build this level of confidence so that all of these elements that are already recognizing how to change and the importance of change can have the confidence to change, because they know all the other parts of the jigsaw are changing too. Now, so I think that's a really, really valuable part of what you're trying to do, and I'm sure you're very aware of it. I just wanted to support it. Yeah, no, I think I'll stop there because I could carry on for too long and time's short. It's really interesting to hear this conversation there.
Thanks very much. But it might be worth me articulating a short story about a question I had in another forum talking about this. When I said that steel specifications should only be recycled steel, which actually is what Lend-Lease have now done for all of their global projects, should only be recycled. And somebody said to me, well, surely there isn't enough steel to be recycled for that to happen. And I said, well, if there isn't enough steel to be recycled, we should build in another way. We shouldn't use steel. You know, that's the level of disruption that's got to happen. We should take the view that using raw ore, iron and coal and all the rest of it is no longer an option for the human race. You know, we've got to stop it. We've got to actually move to another model where we recycle what we have using renewable energy and move differently. And we have got to be, you know, in a sense, that disruptive in order for this to work. And I think professions and professional disciplines are the people who can make that happen, I think.
And this is very much the story of UK Fires, the research group in the UK that came up with the absolute zero talk. Yeah. And they say basically, if the concrete industry hasn't sorted out a zero carbon concrete very soon, we will have to stop using cement. So, you know, we have to start preparing people for future scenarios where things will be very different.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
I mean, there's materials like hemp and bamboo, which could be used in the building industry, you know, just as a suggestion. And if you grow bamboo, it means that you're absorbing carbon dioxide as well. So there's lots of models of win-win situations in regards to building the built environment.
Yes, thanks, Chris. We did a project in India where with the architect, we designed a sun screening membrane to go all over the public areas and up the sides of the buildings, which would carry solar panels and water collection and lots of other things. And that was built using a bamboo grid with recycled aluminium nodes. And we planted a bamboo plantation next to the building using the wastewater to grow the bamboo, so that when that bamboo reached the end of its life, it could be replaced. And that sort of thinking is entirely possible for all sorts of materials, natural materials. So I think that's a very important part of the thinking that we need, really.
Peter, at this point, I'd like us to pass over to Kevin and then back to you to close us out, because we're 10 minutes before the top of the hour.
Thanks, Deborah. The first thing I'd like to say is I'm going to talk about the Built Environment Pivot Institute. Peter, about 3-4 weeks ago, handed me a bundle of papers in small text, which was the record of all the conversations and workshops that have built towards creating the Built Environment Pivot Institute. So this is not my idea, and I think I could say not yours, Peter, but it's the outcome of many conversations. And he asked me to think about how this might be created and to lead its creation. So I've written down as a purpose, a global institute to transform the built environment by pivoting and accelerating our progress to carbon zero no later than 2050 and regenerating ecological systems. And I've used the word transform, but I see on the chat line that radical has already been used quite a lot, but I think if I understand the global experts that are supporting Peter, then certainly this is meant to be radical and transformative. It's for engineers, architects, planners, investors, developers, public sector, product suppliers, builders, owners, universities and educational establishments, so a wide range of stakeholders. And its first key function, I think, is to convene knowledge. Convene knowledge in pivot-based teaching and research at universities, in career training, AI across discipline problem solving, example performance specifications for both retrofit and new build, case studies and identification of demonstration regions for members to work on. And so far, we've identified 7 main stakeholder groups. Investors and clients who want to mandate procurement on a sustainable basis using performance-based specifications. Business and industry partners who want to deliver the sustainable buildings, products and services and will need to develop the new organisational skills and capabilities. Professional institutions who will need to deliver the accreditation and professional development schemes to support the pivoting of young professional engineers. And in particular, we would like to propose the use of post-nominal initials, the new use of the letter P that would signify the individuals concerned are committed to working on zero carbon sustainable developments only. So for example, MICE would become PMICE, and that came from the professional, from the practicing professionals themselves. Universities who would be responsible for delivering pivot courses accredited by the engineering institutions, and we believe that sustainable development should be included in every tertiary educational course. Educational establishments, because it's the next generation who will inherit our legacy, and it's very important they have an equal voice in this. Governments who have their hands on policy levers and are also, of course, one of the biggest single largest purchasers of goods, services for infrastructure and buildings. And practitioners, by which I mean the professionals themselves, who want to commit their working lives to pivot outcomes and need support, training and opportunities to practice the new disciplines. I was watching the chat line and I see that trade unions was on there. That's not on my stakeholder map. And I add it, and at the same time, I'll pick up the point about trust and transparency, which is really important in terms of the governance of this. So this is already building with today's conversation. As Peter has said, the Pivot Project has already assembled 150 experts from around the world, many who are on this conversation. And it's backed by a world-leading AI research engine, which leads on to the second function of what the Built Environment Pivot Institute is. And that's to provide new and novel insights into climate change and ecological solutions for the built environment by supporting new conversations across disciplines, functions, and organisations around the world. The third function is to bring the first two things together: the knowledge, the AI power and problem-solving capability, and facilitate new and novel demonstration projects around the world. So this initiative is demand-led. It's been suggested by key opinion formers and experts from around the world that have formed pivot projects. And today, and this is part of it, we are consulting more widely with potential partners to seek views on the structure, the objectives and the implementation. The intention being to formally launch the Built Environment Pivot Institute at COP26 in November 2021, having established pilot projects and operations in a number of countries around the world. Thanks, Deborah. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks. Actually, we will hand it to Peter to close us out.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for being here this afternoon and for sticking with us. Those that are in pivot projects, I always say we don't take your voluntary work with us for granted in any way whatsoever. And we're so grateful for your interest and commitment to help make this happen. those of you who are not in pivot projects, I mean, you're very welcome to join us. There's no obligation to join us, but you can literally join us and actually find out what we're about. We clearly do want to take this message out. So this recording will be made available. So if you're excited about this, please do share this recording with your networks and others, because we'd really like to get this message out around the world that we're aiming to take this forward, and Kevin will be very happy to follow up any interest and about the Institute. I think that we are very serious about this, as you probably imagine. There's a group of us who really believe that this is a moment to do something, and it probably, in a sense, it's somewhere between a rebellion and a professional pivot. I think there's got to be an element of rebellion in it, because this is not going to happen naturally. It's going to be a fairly unnatural process. So, so please do contact us. Andre's dropped a contact message, I think, into the chat, and we're really grateful for your interest, and we want you to become part of, even if you're not in pivot projects, part of actually scaling this message out so that we can actually move it all forward. So thank you so much, and thank you, Deborah, for hosting us today. And we wish you well, and please all stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
And a month from now, Colin will be reflecting with us. So please mark your calendar now, and we'll see you in a month, if not before. Thank you all.
Thank you, Debbie. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you all so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.
Hmm.